How much does it cost? Merely those 4 words. That was everything Marco Rubio stated, and the room, which had been enthralled by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for the preceding 8 minutes, abruptly fell into absolute quiet. This occurred not because the question was excessively complicated. It happened because it was extremely fundamental, and fundamental, as it happened, was the precise situation she had not practiced for. She shifted to her usual justification, illustrating a vision of a future so radiant it theoretically surpassed simple arithmetic, expenditures, systemic changes, and environmental rebirth. Rubio stayed completely motionless. That was an articulate address, Congresswoman, but I am seeking a mathematical number. To understand how a lawmaker who amassed a huge base through pure boldness totally alienated the room over basic arithmetic, you must go back exactly 25 minutes to when she still dominated the room. Ocasio-Cortez had expressly requested a seat on this committee for a single purpose. Marco Rubio was the appointed testifier. She slammed her portfolio onto the platform. It was an enormous, densely organized tome, overflowing with chromatic tabs. She placed her mobile device screen down beside her microphone, allowing her fingers to rest on the rim just a split second longer than needed before letting go. Across from her was Rubio, equipped with nothing except a single flashcard. It was small enough to slip inside a suit pocket, filled with scribbled text on both faces. No enormous portfolio, no giant pile of paperwork. The person holding the most concrete statistics in the room had carried the least amount of stationery. She initiated her attack immediately. Secretary Rubio, in the preceding fiscal period alone, your leadership approved $4.2 billion in petroleum subsidies. That constitutes $4.2 billion of public funds streaming directly into the coffers of corporations claiming unprecedented income. And still, you sit in that chair today to lecture this chamber about financial responsibility concerning our power grid? She allowed the charge to linger in the silence. She was an expert at the theatrical hesitation. With full deference, Secretary, you are not giving testimony, you are participating in a staged act. She tilted her body slightly toward the television cameras. It was a deep-rooted tendency, the physical reflex built from numerous internet streams. She probably was not even cognizant she was performing it, but anyone accustomed to her media instantly recognized the pose. And I am fully conscious that audiences are watching currently who have been told a story their whole lives that sustainable power is some marginal, extreme fantasy fabricated by snobs, disconnected from everyday life, she went on. Individuals who have been mailing the exact same payment for their electricity costs for 30 years and presume that makes them power experts. People who believe the economic framework ought to operate exactly as it did in their 30s because, to be completely frank, that was the final epoch they truly understood how it operated. She drew a breath. A subtle smile emerged, the look she kept, for instances, when she was ultimately speaking the unspoken truth publicly. Well, I possess a reality check for those people. The world has evolved. Your dining table finances simply do not suffice as a substitute for valid governmental strategy. Dining table finances. She pronounced the words with flawless articulation into the mic. Recorded on film. Completely intentional. It resonated into living spaces across Louisiana, Ohio, and the muggy expanses of Florida where the air conditioning runs constantly because the warm weather offers no relief. Approximately 60 million residents who had dedicated their entire lives figuring out finances at their dining tables just heard a 35-year-old legislator dismiss their lived experiences. She was totally oblivious to the snare she had merely prepared for herself. However, she was on the verge of finding out. Rubio did not recoil at the arrogance. He merely remained seated, palms framing his tiny note card, calmly waiting for her to finish. His own mother had calculated the finances at one of those exact tables every single Friday night. Motel maid gratuities, minus the lease, minus the grocery allowance, minus whatever materials the children required for classes on Monday. She did not hold a higher diploma in civic administration. She managed on a lead pencil and the back of a bill envelope. He did not vocalize any of this history. He did not need to. The blue-collar public viewing from their houses already comprehended. When she ultimately ceased speaking, he moved closer to his mic. Congresswoman, you just tossed out a data point. $4.2 billion. That is wonderful. I value concrete statistics, he remarked, presenting a slight, nearly inviting tilt of his head. Therefore, let us operate solely with statistics today. Merely the arithmetic. No posturing. Are you prepared to consent to that? She was unable to refuse without displaying an apprehension of simple arithmetic. Therefore, she boldly assented, and with that quiet latch, she secured herself inside the chamber alongside him. His initial question seemed misleadingly gentle, almost like an offering. Concerning your broad ecological initiative, what is the primary, measurable benefit it would provide to a typical working-class home? Her stance relaxed. This was her element, the rhetorical arguments she had learned perfectly. We are projecting 12 million new job prospects by the year 2030, she stated. A 30% reduction in national power costs within a decade-long period. We are building a framework that finally favors the laboring demographic, rather than forsaking them while business magnates stockpile the excess. 12 million positions, Rubio echoed. A 30% decrease. Firm numbers. He carefully wrote the data onto his paper. She watched him recording her guarantees. There was something profoundly unsettling regarding observing an opponent permanently document her vows right then, an emotion she could not completely recognize yet. He was not arguing with her, he was chronicling her statements. I will keep you to those standards, he observed. Currently, about that 30% reduction. What is the precise personal expense for a typical household during the transition phase? The first 5 years before those speculative discounts appear? What is the exact monthly power statement for a family residing in Ohio? The shift period requires significant upfront investment, but the prolonged returns vastly outweigh any fleeting. I did not ask regarding the returns, Rubio interjected seamlessly. I inquired about the bill. On a monthly cycle, for a household in Ohio. What is the monetary figure? Well, that depends strongly on rollout timelines and the particular power networks of distinct regions. Thus, a rough guess then? She possessed no guess. It was not an absence of mental ability. It was because her broad bill had never bothered to execute the arithmetic. Her structure planned out ideal worlds. It forecasted how the planet would appear 10 years out. However, it had completely failed to compute the harsh truth of the 14th month for a household in Akron, who urgently required the warmth on while her idealized grid was being built, and merely minutes before, she had derided that very household's dining table arithmetic as insufficient. Rubio softly set his writing instrument on the table. I will take that to mean you lack a number. That is the first strike, he muttered. Strike one. The whole room understood that a count had commenced. She understood she was being evaluated. You realize, Congresswoman, Rubio continued, almost taking on a casual tone, during my tenure in public service, whenever a lawmaker describes a cost as a future investment, it is broadly translation for, they possess absolutely no clue what the true cost is. The laughter broke out naturally. It was short, genuine, and totally unplanned. A watcher in the third tier attempted to stifle her chuckling and was completely unsuccessful. A Republican aide grinned broadly, abruptly, very fascinated by a blank sheet of stationery. Even a legislator from her own faction on the periphery of the committee hid his visage in his paperwork excessively quickly. It was a chuckle stemming from collective understanding. Every single individual in that room had listened to a husband or a companion employ that exact identical terminology to rationalize an indefensible acquisition. Ocasio-Cortez sensed the ground fracturing beneath her feet. She turned to her primary defensive reflex, absolute hostility. Secretary, if you desire to focus on data, let us converse about the number of teenagers in this country going to bed hungry while your agency reduces food assistance. Let us discuss the families rationing their medication. This ecological plan is not solely regarding the energy network. It is regarding building a culture where zero individuals slip through the fractures of fundamental economic security. Zero. She was completely unaware that she had just opened the precise gateway he had been standing behind. Rubio looked down at his note card. Economic security for zero exclusions. I am pleased you raised that. The common questions file for your environmental plan, the one located on your authenticated formal website, declared that your bill would ensure, and I am citing your precise words here, financial backing for anyone who is incapable or reluctant to labor. He fixed his gaze on her. Reluctant. Not medically unable. Reluctant. Does that continue to be your formal legislative position? That was an initial, unchecked version erroneously uploaded by an overeager team member. It was promptly withdrawn. I have explained this publicly several times. Your principal advisor went on an evening television show and told the host that the file was a total fiction, Rubio rebutted. He specifically claimed the wording did not exist. By the next morning, he admitted it was authentic. It resided on your web page, under your name, For 3 whole days. Rubio angled his head, taking on an expression of deep, sarcastic bewilderment. Thus, to recap, your domain independently uploaded itself. Your legislative draft wrote itself. And your principal advisor released a refutation, an acknowledgement, and a withdrawal. Completely in a void, he nodded his head in mock compassion. Congresswoman, for a person requesting absolute dominance over the American economy, you appear to possess a significant number of functions that merely manage themselves. This instance, the chuckling was not stifled. It roared across the space. It erupted from the audience section and washed over the media members. A man in the back literally slapped his thigh in hilarity, totally indifferent to appearances. A reporter in the front tier giggled, tried to keep her composure, and then simply gave in to the comedy. It was the distinct kind of laughter that removes a presenter's power, the noise of an audience universally concluding, realizing they will never view the presenter credibly anymore. Her mouth clenched tight. I consider it completely intriguing that a high-level administrator has the spare hours to dig through web histories instead of performing his mandated obligations. Rubio did not take the bait. We are not debating my obligations. We are examining your released declaration, carrying your name on your network. Are you asserting today that your own online site deceived people about you? It was a trapping query. An affirmative validated her staff was inept and her agenda unreliable. A negative meant she was formally liable for paying residents who outright declined to obtain employment. Discovering both paths obstructed, she frantically searched for her typical exit route, an ethical shift. Rubio anticipated the tactic before she even shifted her posture. He stopped her immediately. We are not advancing past this yet, Representative. He permitted a heavy, 3-second pause to linger in the room. Rubio's relatives had escaped Cuba because a government had promised comprehensive welfare, including for the idle, and eventually took everything from the hard-working. He did not express this background. He did not need to. He simply glared at her and issued a question much more destructive than a history lesson. Congresswoman, do you strongly hold that an able-bodied resident who purposefully turns down work should be given a publicly financed stipend from a resident who punches the clock every single day? Is that an affirmative or a negative? She declined to answer affirmatively. She declined to answer negatively. She dove into a convoluted rant regarding the systemic flaws in the current social safety net and the complexities of the modern freelance market. Rubio leaned back and allowed her to babble, and the more terminology she frantically piled up to dodge answering affirmative or negative, the more thunderous her non-response grew. Ocasio-Cortez adjusted her strategy. She was an expert in antagonistic settings. She had been forced into tight spaces previously and had constantly fought her way free. She fiercely steered the dialogue into a fresh path. Secretary, since we are arguing about who understands monetary reality, I individually stopped the largest corporate subsidy deal in the annals of New York City. Amazon requested $3 billion in taxpayer grants to occupy a district that never agreed to their arrival, a district that would have been devastated by the ensuing rising costs. I stood firm for my voters. I protected working-class locals from a massive conglomerate trying to utilize public funds as their private bank account, and I would execute the exact same decision tomorrow. She spoke the statement perfectly. Her pitch was victorious, dripping in justified triumph. Behind that microphone, in that brief second, she completely accepted her own legend. Rubio granted her precisely 4 seconds of victory. You stood firm for your voters, he echoed quietly. Let us analyze your voters. He did not even look at his paper. Exactly how many job roles did Amazon promise for your particular zone? Those were completely hypothetical projections, Secretary, not legally enforceable agreements. That business has an infamous history of exaggerating hiring figures to extract the maximum regional tax money. Your region's governor referenced 25,000 positions, Rubio argued. Your city's financial officer anticipated $27 billion in new public income. Were both of your highest Democratic leaders deceiving us? Governor Cuomo issued several remarks that have not withstood the test of time, Secretary. Very good. Then supply your data. Following the expulsion of Amazon, exactly what number of fresh careers has your district generated? My neighborhood has experienced record financial investment into small businesses, community-driven uplifting programs, and local organizations that genuinely aid. That is a promotional brochure, Congresswoman. I requested a mathematical figure. What number of careers? Neighborhood uplifting cannot be reduced to a single statistic. It definitely can when you deduct 25,000 salaries from it. The chamber did not burst into amusement this instance. The mood transitioned into a thick, stifling quiet. It was the oppressive silence that descends when the joking finishes and harsh truth takes hold. In the fourth tier, a pension delivery operator relying on a small set income went rigid. There was absolutely no comedy in this for him. He was hearing a privileged lawmaker boast about destroying livelihoods on behalf of individuals who urgently needed them. He understood the pain of a workplace closing its gates. Rubio executed the fatal strike perfectly. My parent never turned down a single workday, Representative. Not one. Not one single instance in his whole life. You turned down 25,000 of them on behalf of residents who are not you. She rushed to deflect the hit. Her communications prep virtually required it. Amazon is not a charitable group. They do not gift jobs, they utilize human labor. They destroy organizing attempts, and they leave cities in devastation. That is the precise abuse I protected my citizens from. Go rationalize that to the 25,000 families who would have received a reliable paycheck. That was the conclusion of the Amazon discussion, not because it was an especially complicated dispute, but because it was so completely basic that any opposing point would force her to justify why making a wage was somehow troublesome. And in a chamber packed with working-class onlookers, transmitting to millions of people who had dedicated 40 years exchanging their hours for a salary, there was no partisan angle that would not appear remarkably disconnected from reality. Without losing a step, Rubio abruptly altered subjects. No gentle segue. Congresswoman, what is the precise admission cost for the Met Gala? She had expected this. It was very predictable. She had carefully prepared her counter-arguments and refined her answers. But she had planned for the typical right-wing critique. She had not prepared for a highly focused, statistically driven attack initiated by a person whose own parent cleaned the grounds of establishments, just like the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I am completely cognizant of the story you are attempting to weave, Secretary. I am asking for a concrete statistic. What is the bill for an admission pass? I went as an official attendee of the institution, a community cornerstone of my city, a customary routine for New York lawmakers, $35,000 per spot. And you did not pay your own admission, Rubio declared evenly. Your outfit famously displayed, "Tax the rich." Who paid the bill for the dress? I hired professional legal advisors before my attendance to ensure total compliance with legislative integrity rules. The Cross-Party Integrity Committee, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, ruling in unison, determined you neglected to cover the standard price. They found the design firm reduced the cost only after your staff coerced them. Moreover, they discovered you failed to pay your styling professional for 5 consecutive months. That independent worker had to utilize a formal legal grievance merely to secure her earned income. I have completely abided by the panel's conclusions and paid all remaining debts. Therefore, the rear of the outfit requested we tax the affluent. Yet you cheated the working-class citizen arranging your hair for half a year. He hesitated. She was compelled to menace you, a political leader, to secure her earnings. He looked directly at her, and his inflection changed. It was not anger. It was something vastly more profound. Rubio's own parent used to style hair on the weekends for extra funds, Saturdays in their small dining area, immediately following her motel cleaning job. Currency in hand, instantly. 0 bills. That was his life. A life where manual laborers were compensated by the individuals who engaged them, instantly, without necessitating lawful coercion. Exactly who were you taxing at that extravagant function, Congresswoman? Because from my perspective, the lone individual you severely taxed was the worker wielding the styling comb. Ocasio-Cortez grew frantic and played her absolute best card, the one that had intimidated numerous opponents into defeat. This is essentially regarding a laboring-class minority female from the Bronx having the audacity to enter into a privileged social environment only to be constantly questioned by a male who lacks any basic comprehension of that oppressed reality. Rubio shifted. His sound level stayed consistent. He did not jerk toward the mic. However, all the calculated tolerance vanished from his tone, substituted by an icy, uncompromising power. Representative, cease. One word. The whole room went rigid. My parent washed the restrooms at upper-crust events, identically like that one, he proclaimed, his tone a quiet, deadly buzz. She pressed the high-end fabrics. She operated the sweepers before the magnates showed up, and she cleaned the dirt when they left. She was a laboring-class minority female decades before you were even a concept. He maintained her stare, resolute. You are not permitted to weaponize those demographic categories as a defensive barrier in my company. Not before me. He restated it. Not before me. It was not a hesitation. The first statement was a caution to her. The second was an homage to his parent. Then, the tempest hit. He rested back into his leather seat, the calculated voice coming back as his fingers lay lightly upon his lone flashcard. He returned to the composed questioner, but the destruction was lasting. Ocasio-Cortez, who had utilized that particular identity card to freeze many rivals, discovered herself looking at a male completely resistant to the maneuver. For the very first time in her skyrocketing governmental ascent, she recognized her best defense was ineffective. He did not dismiss her history, he superseded it. They both originated from the bleak side of the maintenance lift, and the whole chamber sensed the undeniable reality of it. There was no publicity angle in her enormous portfolio that could alter the truth the room had merely observed. She could sense the unseen, suffocating pressure of the barriers gradually shutting in on her, fraction by painful fraction. The mood in the massive legislative meeting space had basically changed, converting almost immediately from an area she controlled with absolute power into a profoundly adversarial enclosure. The quiet, sparse laughs that had previously sprinkled the space had entirely shifted. They were now radiating solely from her critic's side of the ideological divide. It was a destructive, unavoidable sonic landscape. The dense, still air that remained after Rubio's cutting declarations hovered in the room with a stifling thickness, appearing immensely more burdensome and vastly more enduring than the quick, protective quietness that followed after her own replies. The turning of the chamber was completely physical. Even a loyal backer situated high above in the spectator area, a female who had been vigorously, nearly rhythmically nodding along in eager concurrence with her passionate initial comments merely 20 minutes before, had currently physically withdrawn, folding her arms securely across her torso in a typical, unmistakable pose of mental guarding. Thus, trapped, frantic, and feeling the swift disappearance of her famed aura, she committed a disastrous, permanent, strategic mistake. Rather than shifting to the theoretical, ethical points that typically offered her a secure refuge, she resolved to battle a harsh, merciless statistical conflict against the male who was serenely grasping the final record. With a crisp, intentional action, she snapped open her huge, deeply reinforced, color-marked portfolio. This was the exact instrument she had staged so dramatically, with such calculated visual care, on the wooden table at the start of the early session. Her digits, shaking slightly with a messy blend of epinephrine and escalating dread, searched frantically through the thick leaves for the precise piece of paper that contained her rescue. She ultimately located the sheet. She straightened her back, compelling her stance into a profile of complete, shatterproof power, and amazingly recovered her forceful, quick-fire rhythm once again. The raw, unadulterated, aggressive vigor, the precise magnetic energy that had launched her from obscurely pouring beverages behind a New York tavern to standing on the elevated stage of the United States Capitol complex shortly, brilliantly burst back to lively existence. Very well. You require firm statistics, Secretary? I shall provide you the definitive statistics, she announced, her tone echoing out to the furthest edges of the hushed room. The Green New Deal shall infuse an astounding $12.6 billion straight into sustainable systems during its first 36 months. Solely, it shall create exactly 400,000 highly trained manufacturing professions located squarely in essential, labor-class competitive regions. It shall eternally cut greenhouse gas output by a massive 42% prior to the year 2035. Those are not random guesses. Those are scholarly, peer-assessed, impartially verified, unassailable figures. Opposite the platform, Marco Rubio did not interject during her fervent, frantic speech. He did not raise a palm in objection, neither did he lean toward his mic to silence her. He merely allowed every single word of her victorious proclamation to hit solidly upon the shiny timber desks and rebound off the tall stone structures. He waited calmly until the absolute last echo of her tone had dissipated into complete silence. Afterward, speaking hardly above a quiet murmur, a level so soft it compelled the entire space to physically tilt closer merely to listen to him, he delivered his catastrophic strike. That main figure, he whispered softly, the 12.6 billion. What is your precise, exact origin for that figure? She did not skip a single pulse, completely oblivious of the iron jaw closing firmly around her feet. That number is pulled straight from the main economic prediction of our central policy document, and it has effectively withstood strict external examination. Your very own personnel issued a formal withdrawal on that exact measurement, approximately 8 weeks prior, Rubio declared icily, his tone empty of any dramatic victory, holding merely the deadly mass of undeniable truth. Your own internal analysts discreetly reduced that estimate to 4.1 billion following harsh, extensive procedural criticism. You are resting there aggressively reciting a statistic that your very own staff has previously openly rejected. The consequent quietness that flooded over the space was completely, essentially distinct from the preceding silent periods of the session. Previous silences were generated solely from her brief failure to construct a reply to his theoretical snares. This fresh quietness, however, was generated from the dreadful comprehension that she had responded. She had responded with absolute confidence, fiercely wielding her own intensely studied, heavily prepared portfolio, aggressively referencing her own carefully selected, deeply managed arithmetic, and she was entirely, factually, neutrally wrong. This was not a subjective variance of political perspective. This was a disastrous factual blunder, a huge misjudgment disproven by her own workforce. 2 full months earlier, which she had somehow overlooked. Rubio peacefully picked up his basic writing instrument from the table and traced a purposeful, excruciatingly slow dash right across the middle of his tiny flashcard. The distinct scrape of the instrument was noticeable in the quiet room. 12.6 is currently 4.1, he stated neutrally. That is your own staff's correction, Congresswoman. It is not a factional assault from my section of the chamber. It is yours. He intentionally set the instrument back down upon the table, the gentle clack resonating like a final gavel strike. You passionately requested this proceeding expressly, so you might debate with me regarding economic numbers. And still, the absolute initial number you tossed at me was one your very own team already tossed into the trash. The chuckling that broke out from the room was not merely mean, it was fatal. It was the absolute, clear noise of a crowd fundamentally and eternally shedding its terror of a legislative giant. A woman onlooker sitting close to the front of the platform emitted an uncontrollable snort of amusement, appeared briefly ashamed for violating legislative propriety, and subsequently, recognizing the illusion was permanently shattered, merely leaned totally into her hilarity. A serious security guard stationed near the perimeter intently examined the complex designs of the rug to frantically hide his growing smile. The entertainment fed intensely on itself. It was the strange, intoxicating, shared relief of an entire chamber concurrently understanding the fabled ruler possessed absolutely zero garments. Once an enthralled crowd loses its profound terror of you, that terror never ever comes back. You could manage to conquer a subsequent policy argument, or you could utilize your remaining supporters to secure another voting cycle. However, the magical atmosphere of invulnerability is broken forever into a million unrecoverable fragments. Rubio deliberately moved his focused stare. He did not glance down at his handwritten papers. He did not glance up at the flashing crimson indicators of the television cameras. He gazed straight, unyieldingly, at her. "Representative, I asked 4 specific questions to you today," he commenced, his tone adopting the even cadence of a magistrate delivering a concluding, irreversible judgment. "I requested the actual price tag of your broad agenda. You delivered a rehearsed political address. I inquired if you supported the text on your own online domain. You oddly asserted your site glitched automatically. I requested regional job statistics concerning your zone. You referenced a shiny promotional booklet. I asked whether you funded your own high-end event bill. You had not." He allowed the harsh review to linger. He permitted the total collapse of her display to rest upon the space like a dense winter freeze. This was not a simple conversational summary. It was a carefully designed execution stage. "And when you finally, frantically tried to wield a solid statistic," he went on, "drawn directly from your carefully marked, densely arranged portfolio. It was a fabricated statistic your own personnel discarded 2 whole months prior." His voice sank even deeper, scraping the absolute base of his speaking range. The entire legislative room bodily pushed nearer to listen to his subsequent statements. "You possess zero understanding of what anything in this universe genuinely requires," he declared. "Not your massive, idealized policy, not your couture high-end dress, not your elevated governmental promises. And the singular cause you do not understand the real expense is that you have never, not a single instance, been compelled to genuinely pay the invoice yourself. Another person always intervenes and handles your expenses. For the initial moment throughout the whole exhausting event, Rubio severed his focused visual connection with her and pivoted his face. He stared straight into the dark emptiness of the main broadcast camera. He totally circumvented the panel colleagues next to him. He disregarded the hastily noting reporters in the seating area, and he conversed straight, personally, into the simple living spaces of the people she had so flippantly derided previously. He was addressing the individuals right now, writing out frantic survival spreadsheets in lead on the reverse of discarded spam envelope. "It is they," he murmured gently to the lens. "It is eternally them." Those half-dozen concluding, destructive terms inflicted more disastrous harm to her legislative shielding than a several-hour, intensely prepared ideological speech ever might have accomplished. Ocasio-Cortez visibly struggled for breath, her torso rising. Secretary, with all due she suffocated. The syllables merely perished in her windpipe. Rubio did not interrupt her. The panel head did not forcefully bang the wooden mallet to request decorum. There was zero outside pressure silencing her. Her very biology merely revolted against her willful mind. For the absolute initial time on the vast public platform, her speaking muscles tried to launch a protective concept that her respiratory system completely declined to fuel with air. She turned totally stiff, the frantic phantom of an aggressive comeback caught pointlessly upon her visage, completely and totally immobilized. 3 harsh, excruciatingly extended seconds passed in absolute quiet. A watcher in the second tier pushed forward, eyes wide. An individual in the rear of the chamber literally ceased inhaling. Subsequently, her frame spasmed uncontrollably. Consumed by a basic survival reaction, she reflexively pushed her heavy leather seat backwards. It was not a huge withdrawal, perhaps 6 inches maximally, however. The timber supports scraped loudly and aggressively against the shining stone ground. The awful shriek resonated powerfully through her active mic, transmitting the clear, sad sound of a dominant lawmaker bodily escaping before her deliberate mind had even approved the fallback. As she lurched rearward in her chair, her arm flailed uncontrollably and struck the rim of the huge portfolio. The dense book, filled with marked data and hostile comebacks specially engineered for this precise mental war zone, was shoved past the precipice. It fell from the tall table. A messy shower of paperwork burst aggressively across the ground, hundreds of sheets spreading uncontrollably, with their careful, color-coordinated markers pointing pointlessly toward the roof. Not a single individual in the chamber hurried forward to recover them. She could merely gaze down at the disastrous spill. Every sharp, practiced retort, every invented financial forecast, currently made totally worthless, spread like refuse near her footwear on live public broadcast. They lay pathetically upon the absolute identical ground as the refuted, debunked number she had merely risked her whole reputation on. The panel leader finally coughed, the noise cutting uncomfortably through the dense, stifling air. He mechanically and officially asked if the lawmaker wished to provide a response to the testifier's statements. She did not. By evening that exact same date, the video had gone completely explosive, digitally. And surprisingly, it was not Rubio's concluding, destructive speech regarding handling the expenses that exploded in popularity. The web, continually harsh in its unsparing speed, had isolated a flawless, seamlessly refined 14-second segment. It highlighted the precise millisecond she arrogantly, haughtily cited the $12.6 billion figure, succeeded promptly by Rubio's staring, serene, deadly adjustment. Your very own department altered it to 4.1. The condensed video repeated endlessly across every single major digital network platform. There was zero normal ideological squabbling in the venomous discussion threads because factual numerical statistics simply are not open for argument. Millions of citizens merely observed an unbelievably haughty representative completely disgrace herself on her very own specially demanded battleground. The most upvoted remark across the entire internet, attached to the summit of nearly every share, was simply 5 words in length. She never calculates in a kitchen. Down within the muggy warmth of Hialeah, a 6'8" pensioned healthcare employee whose Cuban ancestors had courageously migrated across perilous oceans on a makeshift vessel valued at a microscopic portion of a luxury Met Gala admission, viewed the video brighten the display of her mobile device, while her early beverage turned cool on the surface. She did not laugh. She merely observed the video. Then she rewatched it. Then she lifted her phone and called her sibling residing in Kendall, murmuring a lone, poignant sentence in Spanish. She did not state it to validate a governmental argument, but instead to respect a cherished spirit. He sounded precisely like Papa, she murmured. The telecom connection went quiet. It was the profound, holy quietness experienced solely by people who clearly remember the absolute identical tiny dining desk, the exact same short yellow writing implement, and the tense Friday evenings their mother carefully tallied every single cent, understanding with complete assurance that the state absolutely was not planning to manage it for them. The pensioned caregiver lifted her cup and drank her chilled beverage. She did not dump it away into the sink. Squandering valuable goods simply was not in her nature. Returning to Washington, D.C., within the currently vacating meeting chamber, Marco Rubio peacefully creased his lone note card in half. He placed it securely and safely into the chest pouch of his custom blazer. He departed the massive room in complete, respectable quiet. He strolled directly past the dazzling, strobing flashes of the cameramen, past the fiercely yelling media workers requesting a quote, and past the empty leather seat of the most haughty speaker in Washington, a speaker who had ultimately, fiercely met a severe truth check that a memorable, practiced phrase could not avoid. Written in deep navy fluid at the absolute base of his creased paper, concealed safely below the destructive numbers, was a short, intensely intimate phrase penned in Spanish. He never revealed it to the ravenous press. The exact meaning stays permanently secret, but it rested flawlessly inside his pocket, sitting directly alongside the unassailable realities. It constantly had.